Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today at the What to Expect from a Site Visit webinar. My name is Katie Bull, and I am an Agency Relations Account Specialist at Second Harvest Heartland. We are very excited to be doing this webinar today, and we have a great turnout of folks on the line. And we're pleased to have Lisa Boyd, Agency Relations Specialist, and our Agency Relations intern, Beth Maldonado, presenting this webinar for us. Before we get started, I just want to cover some quick housekeeping details about the webinar. All of your lines are muted, so you don't need to worry about any background noise. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to enter them in the question box. This is located in the control panel, which is that box that's to the right of your screen. We will hopefully have some time at the end of the webinar to answer these questions. And if we do have time, we will also be able to take questions verbally. To ask a question verbally, you can click on the hand icon, which you'll see on your control panel as well, and that raises your hand and then we can unmute your line. Also feel free to contact your account specialist after the webinar if you have any additional questions. This webinar is being recorded and will be accessible on Agency Zone within the next week. Also, watch for a follow-up email with a link to an evaluation and a copy of a PowerPoint presentation and some of the resources that we will be mentioning. And now I will go ahead and turn it over to Lisa.
Good morning, everyone. As Katie mentioned, I'm Lisa Boyd, an account specialist with Second Harvest Heartland. Presenting with me this morning will also be Katie Bull, who introduced our session today, Beth Maldonado, our fabulous agency relations intern, and our colleague Jennifer Shetta, who's also an account specialist with Second Harvest Heartland. So I want to thank everyone for participating in the webinar today. We really appreciate the time that you're taking to find out more about site visits. And by the end of the session, we hope to have met the following goals: learn what to prepare ahead of time, learn how to access resources for compliance, learn exactly what happens during the visit, and develop ideas for improving and increasing your service. We do encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation this morning by typing them into the chat box. And here's a leading question to get you started. What is the most mysterious part of the site visit for you? So as Katie mentioned, you can type your questions in the chat bar. We do want to hear from you right away. We do hope we'll probably cover everything you might want to ask during the presentation, but time permitting, we'll address your questions at the end if they haven't already been answered, or we'll follow up with an email for anything that we don't have time to cover. So why do we do site visits? In order to protect the clients we serve, in order to protect the integrity of our organizations and our donors, to fulfill our obligations with Feeding America, as an opportunity to connect with and collaborate with agency partners, and as outlined in the partnership agreement. So we really do see this site visits process as part of the partnership, as a collaboration. We want to be able to work with you to make sure you have the resources you need to work safely and effectively. And we are also required to do biannual site visits as part of our relationship with Feeding America, which is our national food bank network. We want to make sure that we're not seen as the food police. We really want you to be in a position to serve the clients who need our food services, and that's always going to be our goal, is to keep those programs going. So what happens before a site visit? You will get an email or a call from your account specialist to schedule it. It's usually scheduled about a month in advance. That's approximately when you should hear from one of us the first time to try and get it on the calendar. You want to block out about 60 to 90 minutes for a site visit. And before we come out, once we have the date set, the account specialist will email you a pre-site visit checklist. It is important when we reach out to you that you're responsive so that the site visit can be scheduled in a timely a timely manner. We're expected to do each monitoring visit to your program within a 2-year period. This is a promise that we make to Feeding America and to our donors, that we are doing these checks once every 2 years at least. So what can you do to have a successful site visit? You want to make sure that you've been in touch with your account specialist in response to the request for the visit, and then communicate with them about the details. And that's not only the date and time, but if they've not been there before, what are some good directions to get there? Where's a good place to park? One of my favorites is, what entrance should I come in? A lot of you know, if you work in an old church building, there's multiple entrances, and that's a good detail to have ahead of time. You want to review the pre-site visit checklist and ask any questions ahead of time, especially if there's documentation you need to have and you're not sure you're using the right document. You may want to invite other staff or volunteers or others in your program who would benefit from the meeting. This could be people who order regularly, the person who's responsible for reporting monthly statistics. You might want to invite one of your board members or your executive director if you think that they could benefit from the meeting. And then you do want to make sure, once you've reviewed the checklist, that you have all the required documents on hand. And we are going to go through pretty much all of those this morning. So one thing you want to have ready even ahead of time, and make sure you have that on file always, is your current board list. We like to get it ahead of time, especially we prefer to have it emailed as an electronic file because that's how we file it in our system. We want to have contact information for board members. At the very least, we would like contact information for the chair. Why are we asking for a board list? Well, we can only set up partnerships with 501c3 nonprofits or church organizations that are in good standing in terms of their charitable status. Having a current board list is showing that you have an active board, and that's part of how we verify that you're a 501c3 or a church in good standing. We are also going to check separately to make sure that that status is current, but the board list is one piece of documentation we want you to provide. If you are a faith-based organization like a church or a mosque, your board could actually be called a church council or an advisory board or the church board of trustees. It's whatever body that's responsible for the organization overall, because the partnership is actually with the lead organization, not necessarily just an advisory board you may have for your food shelf. We need the organization's board. You want to make sure you have the most current partnership agreement on file. This is something you were asked to do, or your organization was asked to do when we recently went through the renewal process. We ask that you keep a copy on file. It's important that you be able to refer back to all of the terms of the partnership that your organization has agreed to. And we're going to begin asking that you make sure you have about a year's worth of your invoices for the orders that you've placed with Second Harvest Heartland. There's a number of reasons to have these on file going back at least a year. They're very helpful in terms of recall tracking. If there's an emergency recall, you can quick pull recent invoices and see if you actually ordered the product from us that's being recalled. It's a good way to keep track of what you order. If you're trying to report back to someone in your organization about how much purchased item you got from us versus donated versus TFAP, if you're a TFAP program, these records will show you that at a glance. And it's just a good accounting practice. You can keep paper files certainly, but if you have a practice for scanning them and keeping them electronically, that's fine too. We're going to start asking to see that you have 1 year's worth of temperature logs. I'm sure that everyone who's participating in the webinar today is regularly logging the temperatures for their coolers and their freezers, and you're doing it every week, every day you're open, year-round. But I can't tell you how many times I've discovered when I go out to a site visit that, oh, they just started keeping the logs the week before the site visit after I sent them the checklist. And so we're going to start verifying that this is a consistent practice. It is important for food safety reasons. Another new expectation under the current partnership agreement is that 75% of your beneficiaries are low income or in crisis. And so we're going to ask that you verify this at least once a year. For a TFAP authorized program, this is already happening as part of their intake process, but for other types of programs, you might want to do an annual survey. It might work to do a brief intake each time you do your program, whether it's a food distribution or a meal program. But we want you to have a written record. It's self-declaration, of course, but we want to know that you've verified that at least 75% of the clients using your services are eligible for this. Here's just one example of a template that we can provide you. This is a quick and simple intake process where clients can indicate, yes, they meet the income guidelines. So you'll see we define low income as 200% of the federal poverty level, and we're happy to provide you with these numbers. They do get updated each year, and so if you need us to help you find out what they are, we're happy to provide that information. And we do have a variety of templates available. For example, if you have a meal program and it's simpler just to do a survey once or twice a year, we can provide you with some sample survey documents. So at least one person directly involved in your food program should have the appropriate level of food safety training. We only ask that you always have a food safety trained person designated, and if that person changes, please make sure that the new person is trained. So this is not necessarily an annual requirement. It's really more one time for the person who is responsible for food safety. So we won't be checking expiration dates necessarily. The type of training is going to depend on what kind of program you have, whether it's a church-based meal program or a homeless shelter with a licensed kitchen or a food shelf or some other kind of grocery distribution. And we have a list of resources available for different types of food safety training. What you see here is a certificate that was generated for somebody who participated in our food safety training for food shelves webinar this past February. But for someone who's required to have a certified food safety manager's license, we'll just check to see that the designated person has that license. And again, we'll have lists available of what type of training is available to your type of program. So again, under the new partnership agreement, all partners now need to have someone from each program do annual civil rights training. And we will make this training available in a variety of ways. For example, the first 2 months of this year, we held webinars each month to do civil rights training online. We recorded that webinar and it's available on our website. Because this is an annual requirement, when we come out for the site visit, we will check to see 2 years worth of documentation. We'll also check to see that your frontline staff and volunteers have been trained annually within your program. So the primary contact who's done a civil rights training with Second Harvest Heartland will then go back and train any staff or volunteers who have direct interaction with their clients. And a very simple tool for doing this is a checklist we have available, and then you'll see there's a very simple sign-in form. You just keep that sign-in form on file, and we'll check to make sure that you've trained those volunteers or additional staff people each year in between site visits. If your program is TFAP authorized, here's a list of additional documents that you will need to show during the site visit. The And Justice for All poster needs to be displayed. A grievance procedure should be displayed. There should be an Americans with Disabilities Act plan on file, how to accommodate people with disabilities within your program. And there should be a limited English proficiency plan on file showing how you accommodate people who don't necessarily speak English, but they're still eligible to access your program. We'll make sure you're using the current versions of the TFAP eligibility form, that's the intake form I referred to earlier, and a data privacy warning notice, also known as the Tennyson warning. This is something required by the state of Minnesota. And the state also requires that you make SNAP and other food support information available to your clients. SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. And another Minnesota requirement is that you make voter registration materials available to your clients. If you need any of these documents before the site visit, just ask, and your account specialist will send them to you. Most of them are also available on our Agency Zone website. Speaking of Agency Zone, here's a page where we've added a lot of these resources. I'm just going to quickly click. So here's the Agency Zone homepage. And right over here in the navigation panel is the resources link. And a lot of these are here, including about the partnership and even the TFAP page. So now I'm going to turn over the next few slides to our intern, Beth Maldonado, and she's going to talk about the agenda we go through during the site visit.
Hi. So when preparing for a site visit, the agenda that we intend to go over, the conversation we intend to have is one, to update the contact information, verify program details, schedules, and things like that, review of follow-up items from the previous visit, review client access practices, and review documentation with you. So we'll check to make sure that we have current information on billing and program contacts, authorized shoppers, people that are authorized to pick up, delivery contacts, and site contacts. If your program schedule has changed or if you're doing your intake differently, we'll take note of that. We'll go over any items that are needed to be addressed from the previous site visit 2 years before, and it'll be an opportunity to review all the documents mentioned above. So when it comes to the tour agenda, visual inspection of all areas where food is stored and prepared and served. There'll be storage, food prep, and distribution areas are clean, organized, and free of evidence of pests. We'll be checking that dry food is stored off of the floor, away from walls, and on sealed or metal shelving. That refrigerators and freezers have thermometers and that the readings are at safe temperatures. And we'll be checking to see that non-food items and toxic chemicals are stored separate from one another and below any food items. We want all chemicals kept below anything edible. We will also be looking to see that meal programs store their ready-to-eat and fully cooked foods above raw foods and meat in the refrigerator or the freezer, and that meal programs have adequate equipment and facilities like hand washing sinks, sanitizing equipment, serving equipment is keeping food at the correct temperature, either hot or cold. Further agenda for review of food safety practices. We're going to identify who is food safety trained for your program. We'll have conversation about food safety practices that are shared within the program, conversations about our recall process, conversations about our safe food transportation process, and conversations about inventory management. A lot of the resources on these topics are available on Agency's own and other websites. You can talk to your account specialist about any of these subjects or other matters that you may want to bring up, and you can also, they can send you additional resources afterwards. These are some of the resources. Food resources from Second Harvest Heartland, how to do statistics, how to order effectively, distribution models, your volunteer program, fundraising network, contact with your agency relations specialist, or just looking at the agency zone website, you can find much more information on these different subjects. So at the end of the visit, your account specialist will review any items where follow-up actions are needed, such as putting thermometers in coolers or providing a board list, and they'll let you know how soon that this needs to happen. They may be able to provide you with some resources on the spot, and things like the Justice for All poster or any other like templates for things that you may need, and they can certainly send you the resources right away after the visit. As you have seen, a lot of these materials are available also on Agency's own website. And then what happens at the end after a site visit is you'll receive a post-visit email from your account specialist that includes a copy of the site visit report. And if there's any follow-up needed, then program contact will respond in writing or email with verification of completion, and the account specialist will confirm that the follow-up is complete and the program is in good standing and that the site visit is concluded. It's very important that we hear from you in a timely manner. Your account specialist will provide reasonable deadlines for completing follow-up, and you can always let them know if you need some more time.
So when you get to the end of the site visit and your account specialist says, well, there's a couple of follow-up items, you may be asking, why us? We thought we did everything right. So know that having some follow-up items is often a very routine part of the site visit process and not necessarily an indication that there's anything wrong with the way you're doing your program. However, we do always want to ensure that we are protecting the integrity of clients, partners, donors, and the hunger relief system as a whole. And by hunger relief system, that includes the food bank, the Feeding America network, food shelves, meal programs, food donors, etc. So we at Second Harvest want to make sure we're doing our due diligence, but we also really do see this as an opportunity to connect with you in your food programs and provide you with any resources you need to do the best job possible. And now I'll turn things over to my colleague Jennifer Shetta to take us through the first of 2 case studies.
Hello everyone, I'm going to go over my case study. It was a visit with Excellent Food Shelf and it went really, really well. We had a great discussion about a produce drop they're starting this summer and some other things that they're doing. When we went over the compliance items, that also went very well, but we did end up having one issue that we had to address. When we were visiting the storage area, I did notice that some food was being stored directly on the ground. And when I talked about it with the director, she said that sometimes after they get a large delivery or a community food drive, and I think a lot of you can sympathize with this, they just didn't have room on their shelving for everything. So we talked about it. We discussed that keeping food off the ground by at least 6 inches is a food safety requirement. So we talked about things that they might be able to do to get that food off the ground in those cases when they were really full in their storage area. Clean pallets could be used, and maybe they just needed some additional shelving. But we really needed to find a way to get that food up off the ground all the time. We talked about it. The director agreed that she would find a solution. She did, of course, want to speak to her team about what would work best. And then at the end of the visit, we also went over this, so she knew that this was going to be a follow-up item. So after the visit, our process is to follow up with an email. So I did send her an email thanking her for the visit. And then I did document then that one follow-up item that we had, which was getting the food up off the ground. And then I also asked her to get back to me within a certain time frame so that I could close out the visit and document this. So I gave her 10 business days to find a solution and then to confirm that food would no longer be stored on the ground. So then on May 12th, within the time frame I had allotted, Jane did get back to me. She was able to secure some shelving through a donation, and now we'll have no more need to store food on the ground. So she confirmed that in the email, and so then I was able to respond back to her that I did receive this and that she has completed her follow-up items. I put this in her electronic file and closed out the visit. And then everything was done.
Thank you, Jennifer. And now our next case study is going to be presented by Katie Bull.
Great, thank you. So I visited the XYZ food shelf back in April, and the coordinator and I had a great discussion about the things they were doing at the food shelf and their plans for the summer. And during the visit, I found one thing that was out of compliance. The food shelf was checking those temperatures on their freezer, but they weren't keeping written temperature logs. I informed Hope at the visit that temperatures did need to be logged each day the facility is open or once a week, whichever is more frequent, and they're open a couple times a week. So I noted that as an item for follow-up on the form. And I also told Hope about that. So then I emailed Hope on Friday, April 10th, thanking her for the visit, and let her know about the follow-up item, asking her to begin tracking the temperatures taken in the freezer and email me back within 10 business days, April 24th, to confirm that the temperatures were being tracked every day the food shelf is open. I right away got an email back from Hope thanking me for the visit and saying she would take care of the follow-up on Monday. However, by April 23rd, I hadn't heard anything back about logging temperatures. I emailed Hope and reminded her about the due date and let her know that the account would go on hold if I didn't hear back from her by the 24th. So it came to the 24th. I let her have the whole day, but still didn't have an answer by the end of the day. So on the morning of April 27th, after still not seeing a response, I put the account on hold, meaning they could not place an order or shop. On Thursday, I got a call from Hope stating that her assistant had tried to order on Agency Express and wasn't able to. There was a message that popped up saying the account was on hold for other reasons. So she didn't know exactly what that message meant, and I told Hope that I had put the account on hold because I hadn't heard back from her on the site visit follow-up regarding the temperature logs. And Hope said, "Oh, I took care of that at the beginning of last week. We've been doing it every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when we're open." I thanked her for her diligence in recording temperatures, but I told her that we did need a documented follow-up, and I hadn't gotten an email response from her yet. "Oh yeah," she said, "I guess I haven't been on my email in a while." Hope said she would send me an email, and a couple minutes later, it popped into my inbox. Sorry, I forgot about this. I wanted to confirm that XYZ Food Shelf is now logging the temperatures each day the food shelf is open. So I went ahead and filed this email in XYZ Food Shelf's files. I responded to Hope and I let her know that that was wonderful. The answer had been filed. I took the account off hold, let Hope know that as well, and let her know that the site visit had been completed.
Thank you, Katie. So it's about 11:30, which means we have plenty of time for Q&A. And so we'll look at any questions presented during the presentation. And you can also indicate that you'd like to ask a question directly. And Katie Bull is going to be moderating this.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. So we do have a few questions that have come in throughout the webinar, and I want to encourage you to please keep putting in any questions that you have in the questions box. Or if you would like to raise your hand, I can certainly unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. So I'll keep an eye on that. So Lisa, the first question here is, we do civil rights training annually with all staff, and training is provided through our corporate office. It is stored off-site. Do we need to redo the training with Second Harvest, or do these records this training work for civil rights? Let's start you off with kind of a difficult one here.
A simple question.
Yes.
Although I do a lot of work with the civil rights training, and that's a very good question. So the first thing we would really want to verify is how closely does the civil rights training that you're doing through your organization match the civil rights training that we're doing. And it very well could be that you're going to need to do the Second Harvest Heartland training separately, because a lot of the information in that presentation is very specifically tied not only to the USDA commodities that are distributed through the TFAP programs, but also donated food and emergency food access in general. And that may be slightly different than a corporate training that's about good civil rights practices within your organization. So my first thought is, yes, you may need to do both trainings. However, what that means then is you can have one person from your emergency food program do the training directly through Second Harvest Heartland, either during the annual webinar or after it's recorded. You can just do it online at your convenience. Anyone else in your program who does have direct contact with the clients can either do the online training or they can just sign off on that checklist.
Great, thank you. So another question here, you had mentioned client access practices as something that would be talked about in the site visit, and I'm wondering if you could, the question is if you can talk a little bit more about what are client access practices?
So client access can mean a number of different things. It tends to start with what is your intake process, especially if you're like a food shelf or a mass produce distribution and you're handing out groceries, and you're expected by Second Harvest Heartland and others to keep track of everybody you're serving. And so you may either have a very simple intake process at a produce distribution. It could just be that you are having people sign a sheet, or you're even just doing a verbal quick interview, how many people in your family, how many kids, how many seniors, because we're expected to report these numbers back to Second Harvest Heartland. Or for a TFAP authorized food shelf, they have to have their clients sign the TFAP eligibility form and the data privacy warning once a year. They may ask them to put down address information, and they need to know the household composition, again, so they can keep track of those age demographics. But you always want to make sure that that we can review how you're doing that to make sure that's an open process. It's not overly burdensome for your clients. You're not asking them to do things like prove their income. You really can't do that in an emergency food program. It has to be self-declaration, things like that. Another thing we might look at in terms of client access is how you're doing the distribution or how you're providing the meal. For a food shelf, are you pre-bagging the groceries, or is it a version of client choice where they can fill out a shopping list, or is it what we might refer to as full client shopping, client choice? At the moment, each of our food shelf partners may have a slightly different practice, but we really strongly encourage client choice. So we'll talk with you about those processes in terms of your intake, how the clients take the food that they're being provided, whether it's client choice or pre-bagged groceries. And then we might also talk a little bit with you about the kind of outreach that you're doing. As a way of example, sometimes I've met with smaller programs and I ask them, how do you do outreach? How do you let people know about your food shelf program? And quite often the answer is, oh, it's word of mouth. Everybody knows about us. Well, everybody knows about that food shelf except the people who don't know about that food shelf. And so, again, as a best practice, we encourage people to do a little publicity, signage, maybe notes in church bulletins or flyers at community or neighborhood organizations, and we'll review those practices as well.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. So another question here. If a requirement of being served through our agency for any services is that clients are at or under 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, do we still need to specifically verify through the food program that clients are below this guideline, or will our agency policy/intake for other programs at our facility work as verification? So I think the question is around, if you're doing some kind of other intake for your full program.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
So yes, if you have some other kind of record, for example, there's a mobile food shelf program I work with that goes primarily to senior high-rise buildings. Now, it happens that they do have to have them sign the TFAP form because they're distributing TFAP, but if they weren't doing TFAP, the record would be that, so they've got records of where their clients live, and in fact their clients are living in subsidized housing, so that automatically qualifies them. So I think the answer is yes, if you have other records, or if there's a distribution happening at a school program and there's records showing the children who are accessing the food distribution are also those children who are enrolled in free and reduced lunch, having those free and reduced lunch records on file also satisfies that requirement. Does that make sense?
Does to me. Thanks. Yeah, let us know if you have any follow-up questions to that, Caitlin.
I think the short answer is yes.
Yeah.
Other records that verify that are acceptable.
Great. So a couple just logistics questions here, asking if the presentation will be emailed to all of you, and yes, it will be. We will be emailing this presentation, the PowerPoint, and also give you a link to where you can find the recorded version. So if there's folks who weren't able to watch it, they will be able to do that. And then we'll also follow up and let you know more specifically on Agency Zone where some of these different resources like the temperature logs are kept. So another question specifically around the site visit, do we need to keep Second Harvest invoices on site for more than 1 year?
No, we're just asking to see a year's worth of invoices.
Great. So it's really up to you if your accounting practices to, have a different set of document retention rules. You may want to look at that as well. Okay, so any other questions? I don't see any hands raised. And it looks like we've gotten to everything else.
Katie, I'm seeing some other questions here. Oh, there's the...
Oh, here's a question, Lisa. If an agency does not have two years worth of temperature logs or a year worth of invoices on site, what will happen?
That's another really good question. So for most of those types of items, this is really a fairly new expectation, or it always would have been a good practice, but now we're going to start checking. So our approach is really going to be this first time around to work with you on that. And so we're not going to show up and go, surprise, now we need a year's worth of invoices going back into 2014. What we're really going to do is note that we talked with you about that and that you know that's an expectation. And so probably our note will read something to the effect of, this information was provided and no follow-up is needed. However, now that we've explained all of that to you, the very next time that we come out, we will expect to see a full year of invoices, a full year of temperature logs, and 2 years from now, if that's still an issue, that will be follow-up that needs to be taken care of. And that will be noted on the report.
Okay.
So if there are no other questions, I think that concludes our webinar this morning. I really want to thank everyone for your time and attention. We know that you're all very, very busy. Emergency food programs don't really take a holiday. And as Katie mentioned, this webinar has been recorded and will be posted to Agency Zone. So if you want other members of your organization or your programs to watch it online, it will be available very soon. And any other questions that you think of later, you can certainly contact your account specialist directly and they'll be happy to answer them. And finally, I just want to thank the whole agency relations team for working really hard to put this together.